Well, hello everybody. I'm Gary from Lantana Removal, Queensland. I work with my son out of Narangba. Our phone number is 0449 986 880, and we specialise in the eradication of lantana on all slopes, 20 and 30 degrees, and we eradicate it and we do it permanently. We don't muck around with it like the others do. Now, this video is about animal welfare. We keep getting people coming onto Facebook selling goats and other animals as a process to eradicate lantana. Now, because of that massive infestations at Dundas, if you look at my video, the bottom of Mount Glorious, and have a look at that footage of those areas, you will find that the SEQ Water and National Parks and Wildlife have thousands upon thousands of acres of material out there, where the material makes up between 60 and 80% of the foliage and the available forage for the animals. Now, we are having a lot of Australian natives that are dying from eating lantana, but you don't hear about those animals. You only hear about cattle through the Department of Agriculture and Forestry and the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy. Okay, so within those organisations, they're supposed to oversee the procedures for these things to be taken care of, that the councils do their job and they operate properly, which they don't do any of the works actually, and they operate illegally. And all of these departments know that they're operating illegally by releasing this material to the environment. But you know, Biosecurity Queensland, Biosecurity Australia is supposed to be responsible for the biosecurity of our nation, okay? And yet they allow these government departments, namely councils, main roads, Southeast Queensland Water, to release these things to the environment. Now, when I filmed that film there, when you have a look at the drone footage, you see how massive the overall vines and lantana are in those areas. So somewhere along the line, I believe, because of a response to that video, somebody's placed bush cattle in those areas, which are cattle that aren't... the Department of Agriculture and Forestry define them as naive cattle. That's a term, that's the only time I've ever heard it. Cattle people will say to you, look, if you bring cattle in from somewhere that doesn't have lantana and you release them into that environment, they'll eat it and they'll die. And some of those cattle people have lost large numbers of stock to that process. So stock that is in an area that's had lantana for a long time, they will die, but the ones that survive will learn from it and they won't eat the material. So you call them educated because they've been in that environment. Now, I approached the RSPCA because it's a very serious issue that the Council, the Somerset Council, ignore these massive infestations of lantana on their lands illegally. Okay, so I've written to them also and asked them to clarify who owns those properties, who owns those lands, and to you know, let us know from there, because these cattle are eating massive amounts of this material. They've been released in there for about 6 weeks, and at this time of year, anybody that knows cattle or has anything to do with cattle are very aware that this time of year they will go after lantana, because there's very little else forage. That material makes up 60 to 80% of the forage in that area. Now, it will kill them, and that's where I was shocked, because the RSPCA said, well, if somebody feeds them a material that is that they know will kill or harm the animal, it's against the law to do that. If the animal shows any signs, they must get veterinary care for the animals. And it went on, and then it said, but there are exclusions to this through the Department of Agriculture and Forestry. And I was like, whoa, I really want to hear this story. How the hell can there be another law that says that if you, you know, that there's another out for somebody to actually do this? Now, it took 2 days before the DAF got back to me, but I won't give them a hard time about that. The person that got to me was very knowledgeable, sounded like an older gentleman talking to me on the phone of the things, and he was fairly open with the way he was discussing the stuff. And I understand that, like for average farmers, if they accidentally get a some cattle poisoned, the primary industries doesn't want to prosecute or really go after those people, because accidents happen, and you can't control everything. But these people have actually released these animals into this environment, and they are mowing down huge amounts of lantana, which means they will die. Okay, so he said, well, the problem with the law is you've got to actually prove that the person actually knew what they were doing was going to kill or harm the animal. That gets a little more tricky. Now, if they've released naive cattle into that area, then that changes those things a little bit. Okay, if there's no other real forage for those cattle, it changes it again. Okay, now I've made those inquiries of the national parks. I've made it of the Somerset Council. They're all dead quiet about who owns the cattle, about who owns the land. The Water Board's completely ignorant of answering those questions. They ignore the whole problem. So it really does make you wonder how the Anastasia Palaszczuk and the federal government operates like this, that everybody's out to lunch and nobody wants to talk about these cattle being placed in harm's way. So basically we have a situation where people come to Facebook and they say, oh, buy goats. Goats are great for eating lantana and killing lantana. Okay, goats die from eating lantana. That's a simple fact. Okay, cattle die from eating lantana, and we die from eating lantana. Do not eat lantana. There's a public service thing for you. Do not eat lantana. Do not eat the fruit off it. Do not eat any part of the leaves or the lantana. So it destroys their liver, and they get septicemia and a horrible death. They turn blind. They're light sensitive, so they have a horrific death. Their whole muzzle gets covered in blisters, and the whole insides of their throat and mouth get torn to pieces. It's a little bit windy here, I'm sorry about that. Get torn to pieces. So it's a horrific death. If you ever see any part of this or have a look on the DAF site of the poisoning of animals, you will not want to be watching any of this, and that's what happens to them. Now, he went on to say that anybody that has any situation like that must get veterinary care for those animals immediately. Now, the DAF and the councils, I can't get anybody to... The DAF said to me, the council at Somerset will be able to tell you who owns the land and who you have to put your inquiries to, and we're still waiting to hear back from the Somerset Council, so we'll wait and see. But the Somerset Council have recently said to people at Somerset, because I released material onto the local Facebook group there, and they were saying that the council have told them that they won't clean up lantana at all in dirt roads. Right now, the whole back road of I just can't think of the name of it there, from Dundas a little bit to the south there, is just completely waterboard infestations, where it's 80% of the complete coverage of the terrain, and the whole sides of the roads, all the footpaths are just covered in lantana, which is the Somerset Council's responsibility. And they've been releasing that material to the environment, looking at those things 20 years, I would say, by the looks of it. Clients down those roads are actually boarded by the council, by the water board, and by the national parks, and being inundated from infestations from all of those sources, and illegally inundated. You're not allowed to release this stuff to the environment. You're not allowed to release it to your neighbour, and yet these people are completely unaccountable for this stuff. And your state government and federal government are allowing this stuff to happen right across New South Wales. The amount of people coming in from New South Wales saying the same thing. So anyway, so if these people get on Facebook and they say, oh, goats are a great way to kill this stuff, another guy got on there and said, well, hold on a minute, I bought a herd of goats on somebody telling me this was fantastic, and they were selling me the goats, and the goats won't eat the material. So what you've got to do is you actually stake the goat to the material, and you starve them of being able to eat anything else. Okay, now by you doing that, or by you telling another person that, you are committing an offence. Okay, you willfully know that goat is going to die because of eating that material. Now when this gentleman said to the other one, I bought the herd of goats and they won't eat it, That person went, well, I'm not going to nobody told me I had to stake the goat and starve it to eat the lantana. Okay? And I said, well, hold on a minute. You know the goat's going to die, don't you? And the person said, well, yeah, but you just feed them molasses and other additives, and it makes them live a little bit longer. These animals are dying an anguishing, horrific death, and these people are happily saying, this is okay. I'm happy for you to stake that goat to that plant and force feed that goat that plant. Okay? None of this material is doing those goats any good at all. Okay? It doesn't matter if you have enough other forage that you don't specifically keep them, forcing them to eat it, and you just lock them up there occasionally. You are still doing the wrong thing by those goats. But okay, so the guy says, oh, well, you just feed them this molasses and everything else. And I said, well, you know it's killing the goat, so what's the deal? I said, well, there's plenty more goats out there. So these people, I believe, in my opinion, because they don't have a picture on their thing and they don't, show themselves properly there, I believe they're selling goats, and they're selling goats to people like that, that don't know enough about the subject. But these cattle are in the same place. They're being force-fed this material because of this time of year, and you don't have 30 to 50 head or more of cattle that you don't know something about cattle. The prices of the cattle are substantial, okay? I've had cattle people saying to me that that's an absolutely stupid financial decision to place cattle in that environment, because the price of cattle is that you can go and buy a whole heap of machine operating hours and have that material eradicated than to be damaging your herd and killing off your herd. Only the most immoral people would place cattle in an infestation site like Dundas, right, in the Esk Shire, in the Somerset Shire, and have cattle eating that material to try and alleviate some of the levels of the infestations. It's just a disgrace, and it's actually illegal according to the RSPCA and according to the Department of Agriculture and Forestry. Now they say, but we're not really interested in going out there and inspecting that or having a look at that. And you look at that and you go, Anastasia, like Mark Ferner, what the hell is going on here? How the hell can you have people doing these types of things when things have been filmed, and this is the response? There's no way that the state government departments, lease this land for people to use it. It's either going to be the National Parks and Wildlife land, or it's going to be waterboard land. You can't possibly be dealing with this material on this basis. And the amount of poisonous vine material that's there with the lantana and other cockspur and other things is doing none of these animals any good. So why don't we have any accountability? Why don't you contact us and say, well, listen, look, let's go and have a look at these things. Like I said 10 months ago, the levels of these infestations and pouring out of the national parks, we have to start doing something about this, and doing something about it very seriously. It's illegally being released to the environment, and you've been made aware of it. And still nobody has picked up the phone and said, hey, listen, let's start doing something about these problems. Where would you suggest we go after this material? What would you suggest we do? Instead, they give another $750,000 gift to their council buddies who won't do a day's work on this material anyway. They don't have any clue. Not one of these councils has been successful in eradicating this material. So why would you be paying them to write books? Why would you be paying the departments who haven't got a clue, because this material's at these levels? Why would you be paying them to go and write another book that the other one wasn't even put out? And it's only when I came along and said the information's 50 to 100 year old. At the very least, it's 20 to 50 to 100 year old, depending on which piece of the information you're looking at. It's completely a disgrace, and you're giving more money to that system. They doubled it in 10 years. They're going to double it in 5 and triple it in the next 5 after that. And you have no policies to eradicate the material. Whatever works programs are in place don't even touch the mass of this material. And then you have a council turn around and say, oh, we got some group from, Little Birds of Australia or some bloody organisation saying, oh, well, but you took out too much lantana. Who gives a rat's what some sideline minority says about you took out too much lantana? I've spent 40 years sitting in the middle of this material. There's no massive flocks of birds in there. There's no massive amounts of animals. There isn't animals in there. There isn't birds in there. If something comes through on the outskirts of this material, it doesn't mean it's in there. It's a ridiculous statement. 10 million hectares, gonna double again, 20 million hectares, gonna triple after that. And these people are going, let's sideline this and say this is worth something. We'll do water after this, but we need to start doing something about the animals being force-fed this material knowingly. If you know somebody that is actually allowing these materials to be eaten by animals, right, and or they're encouraging these animals to eat these materials, those people, when those animals show any signs of illness, must get the vet to them. If they don't get the vet to them, they are in a world of trouble. And that's up to you as the public and myself to start holding these people accountable. What they're doing is completely immoral and reprehensible to the worst degree. As I said to the guy at the DAF, I should be able to sit on top of the muppets and shove the lantana down their throat. They deserve to suffer the same fate as what the animal that they're persecuting like that to supposedly save $1 or to cover up the horrendous levels of infestation in the state forests and national parks and the SEQ water. We're getting a huge amount of people through Facebook coming to us and going, hey, listen, we love flying drones. How about we come out for a weekend, you tell us where we want to fly them, and we'll fly and document all the footage of that stuff. So, we're starting to look to, it would be a good thing to go to the national parks and fly some drones through the national parks for the purpose of documenting the lantana levels. It would also be very good because then we'd have physical proof of what it was in 2018 and what it will be in 2019 under the, I don't think these governments, I seriously don't think these governments are going to be in power for much longer with how they're handling this. Scott Morrison's been ignoring this completely, and before him, Malcolm Turnbull ignored it for the whole, 9 months before that, and then Scott Morrison he's been written to a couple of times and he hasn't responded at all. The state governments of both Queensland and New South Wales aren't doing anything about it. They're just playing games of pushing this material backwards and forwards through the DAF and different things, but they're still back to the same thing. You cannot release this material into the environment. Now, if the government wants to change these laws or secretly change those that's fine, do that. Because the people with the levels of these infestations that they have when they're buying properties like these people have here, and they're stuck with the costs of what that actually is to deal with, and it's eating away their asset, and what's the bank going to say when their asset's worth half of what it originally was? And this property got to be the way it was because the gentleman that owned it died, but in the time that he was dying, like he was getting older, he couldn't keep up with the problem of this weed infestation. That's a huge thing within our country. This job here is up near Karoi, near Black Mountain, and when you drive through the ranges there, well, they're not even proper ranges, but you drive through that country and you look down those surfaces and you see thousands of acres of lantana spilling off those roadways, being fed that water, and Anastasia Palaszczuk can't be bothered to figure out that maybe she want to talk about this stuff, because the legal responsibility of all these things is going to be horrendous in the future. Anyway, thanks for popping in. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.